even with many of my own black belts and some of the instructors, I will see them go back and teach chains of movements and veer away from fundamentals, start to teach, personal style or what I would call the fruit and leaves of the tree rather than the trunk and the base and the posture and all the stuff that actually makes jiu-jitsu work. So I think there's two things. One, I've never found teaching that way hard, but it's clear to me over the years that for a lot of people it is hard to teach that way, which is one of the reasons why it's rarely done. And I'll use someone else besides myself as an example, would be Coach John Frankel. So recently, when Coach Frankel's been teaching seminars the last couple of years, he's not just teaching the fundamentals of jiu-jitsu by position, which is usually what I tend to do, but he's teaching one fundamental movement. So if you really break jiu-jitsu down by physical movements, there's really only about 10 or 11. And everything is composed of one of those 10 or 11 movements, one being what we call the universal sprawl, when you sprawl to one side of your body and shift all your weight from one side to the other. So he'll give a seminar on just that movement and show it in all the different places it applies. And what that does for students is that opens up their mind to what a fundamental actually is. It allows them to see it and see it in all the different places in jiu-jitsu. Even if they're a white belt, they'll start to notice it in all the different locations that it is, and then they can focus on that movement and get better a lot faster. So I think that's a brilliant idea. I've never seen anyone do that but him. I've never seen anybody else teach using that methodology. And when I was thinking about why that is, I think it's just because it's hard. To be able to teach at that level, first of all, you have to have an understanding of jiu-jitsu that's pretty high level, as Coach John obviously does. He's a fifth degree black belt. He's been doing it a long time. You also have to think about it long enough to be able to compose and, in your mind, break down the art to that core and then be able to articulate it to other people. And so on top of that, he's also a full-time professor with a high level of education with a PhD from Harvard. So he's got this strong background that allows him to do that. I wouldn't expect the average Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, especially one that's been doing Jiu-Jitsu for less than 30 or 35 years, to be able to pick that up, that method, and do it. It's difficult. That took a lot of work, a lot of intellectual work, I think, on Coach Frankel's part to be able to put together that curriculum and be able to make a seminar out of it. But having said that, there are levels to this game, right? So there's no reason why somebody can't take, like I often do, take a position like mount top or whatever, and think to themselves, what are the 5 most important things to be able to hold this position? What order do they arise in naturally on the mat when you run into problems? What order really of importance are there? Like, what's the single most important thing, and the second most important thing, and third most important thing? And then focus on that. And then insert a collar choke or an arm bar or whatever else you want to do. And when teaching the submission, teach why the submission works, what your body's doing, which it'll do with all the principles of submission that transcend, individual submission that you find everywhere, all the principles that allow you to submit somebody. Anyone can do that, but it takes work, it takes effort, it takes some intellectual energy, and above all else, it takes the will to do all that. And to have the will to do all that, I think in many ways you have to have been exposed to it. And then when you were exposed to it, like the way you appreciate that. I like that way of teaching. So when I see somebody like Coach Henry, for example, Henry Akins, I like all his material. The reason why I like all his material, because it's all very fundamental jiu-jitsu. So once you've been exposed to it, if that's what you like in my case, I can't even really focus on other types of jiu-jitsu instructionals because I wind up getting bored if it's not based around fundamentals. And so there's also just an aspect that's subjective taste. But if somebody hasn't been exposed to it, and I think it goes without saying, I think it's just an obvious that the vast majority of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not taught that way. And if you haven't been exposed to it, and that means the majority of humans that do Jiu-Jitsu have not been exposed to it yet, unless they train with Hickson or Henry or SBG, they wouldn't even know what they're missing. They wouldn't even know where to begin to start to put together a curriculum like that. And so I'll stop here, and otherwise I'll just keep going on. But
it's all good.
But I think you have to have seen it the way you have, And then when you've seen it, been able to appreciate it. A lot of people do. That's why I do seminars and people show up, but there's people who don't. That's not their thing, which is fine. So you have to see it, you have to appreciate it, then you have to put the time and energy into teaching that way. And it's harder to teach that way than it is to just teach technique. The easiest thing in the world to do is to walk out into a jiu-jitsu mat and start teaching some sequence of movements, probably one that you like or that you're good at or that you're working on, in like a 1, 2, 3 format, and then have the students just practice back and forth mimicking what you're doing. That's the simplest thing. Anybody can do that. So by default, that actually becomes what most people do.